Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week, in my political intelligence briefing, I am covering some of the developments in the aftermath of United States President Joe Biden's first foreign trip as the head of state. President Biden traveled to the G7 summit in the United Kingdom, followed by the NATO summit in Belgium. The trip was capped off by the highly anticipated bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva, Switzerland. There were three concrete deliverables coming out of the Biden-Putin meeting in Geneva. As I mentioned last time, both countries agreed on the immediate return of their ambassadors to their posts in Washington, D.C. and Moscow. Second, both countries agreed to work together in circumscribed arenas where they had shared interests. At issue, potentially, was Iran, a reference quite likely to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. However, the election of Ebrahim Raisi, an ultra-conservative, as the new Iranian president, was very likely to negatively impact JCPOA negotiations. Third, progress was made on strategic arms reduction. The decision to agree to extend the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, New START, and the decision to commence discussions on the path forward for nuclear security was considered to be a good first step. With the New START treaty being the last arms reduction treaty between the United States and Russia, and with the two countries possessing more than 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, the commitment to working on the path forward for nuclear security could only be regarded as a positive development. Also of note was the mutual concurrence that the possibility of nuclear war must be avoided was also of high significance. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said this was a significant achievement. These deliverables were in keeping with some of the benchmarks I've earlier specified as being vital, with Putin not actually wanting a stable, predictable, and normal relationship between Washington and Moscow. The Biden administration is recalibrating its approach to Putin and Russia. No longer should the United States anticipate large-scale win-win deliverables, but working to extend the New START, which would have to be renegotiated in 5 years, there is some proverbial, let's call it runway, to make some modest early progress on that front. At the end of the day, the Biden administration was in the burgeoning stages of developing a comprehensive strategy to contain and sometimes engage Putin's Russia. When we say contain, we can include in that strategy the imposition of sanctions when needed. To that end, the United States was preparing fresh sanctions against Russia for the poisoning of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the United States had already sanctioned Russia for the poisoning of Navalny, but noted that there would be further costs for the use of a chemical agent against a Russian citizen on Russian soil. In an interview with CNN, Sullivan said, "We are preparing another package of sanctions to apply in this case. We've shown all along that we're not going to pull our punches." Speaking of sanctions, in the aftermath of G7 talks in the United Kingdom and the NATO summit in Belgium, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and the European Union all placed pressure on Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko by imposing coordinated sanctions on the regime of that country. At issue, the state-sponsored hijacking of a Ryanair jet flying from Athens in Greece to Vilnius in Lithuania, forcing it to land in Minsk in Belarus in order to detain and arrest dissident journalist Roman Protasevich. In a joint statement, the collective world powers said, "We are united in our deep concern regarding the Lukashenko regime's continuing attacks on human rights, fundamental freedoms, and international law." United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the sanctions demonstrated the steadfast transatlantic commitment to supporting the Belarusian people's democratic aspirations. Staying within the zone of Eastern Europe in the aftermath of the NATO summit, I also want to cover the implications for Ukraine. At the conclusion of the NATO summit, the security bloc issued a communique reiterating the 2008 Bucharest summit decision, which states that Ukraine will become a member when it makes key reforms in keeping with NATO principles. United States President Joe Biden said that Ukraine must still root out corruption and implement necessary reforms before it could become a full member of the NATO alliance. Nevertheless, President Biden vowed NATO support for Ukraine as it resists Russian aggression. I'm also covering some key elections around the world. In Peru, rival protests marked the landscape after close elections in that country. While leftist candidate Pedro Castillo maintains his slight lead when the counting was done, right-wing candidate Keiko Fujimori has refused to concede her loss, leading to protests from both camps. Fujimori alleges fraud in the election results, but international observers have said there's no evidence of fraud or any such irregularities in the Peruvian election. In Iran, a highly uncompetitive presidential election was held. I say highly uncompetitive because the Guardian Council approved a list of 7 ultra-conservative candidates, including Judiciary Chief Ebrahim Raisi, with moderate candidates entirely excluded. The ultra-conservative list was so clearly stacked to ensure the election of hardline Raisi that it sparked mass criticism and even calls for an election boycott. Some critics called it a selection rather than an election. In the aftermath of the election, to the surprise of no one, Iran's hardline ultra-conservative candidate Raisi became the president-elect. Turnout was unimpressive, with more than half the voters boycotting the poll. The conservative Reslat daily in Iran hailed Raisi's ascent to power as the dawn of a new era. In truth, it was a backtrack to the hardline and conservative control over Iranian politics, with definite impacts in terms of foreign relations, and quite likely a more insular Iran to come. Of particular importance would be the impact of the election of Raisi on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, negotiations. The Iranian president-elect made clear that he was not interested in perfunctory nuclear negotiations and would also not be meeting with President Joe Biden of the United States. As to the incoming Iranian president, let's be clear, he's a stalwart of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He has a brutal record on human rights, cracking down harshly on Iranian dissidents. According to the Center of Human Rights in Iran, Raisi was part of what they described as a death committee, overseeing the execution of up to 5,000 political prisoners in 1988. More recently, he ruled for the first execution in decades of a man on the basis of alcohol consumption. The reality was that President Raisi ordered a hardline crackdown on dissidents domestically, as well as a more insular Iran internationally. In the next edition of my political intelligence briefing, I will cover the election developments in Ethiopia, political developments in post-coup Myanmar, also known as Burma, and political oppression in Nicaragua. In addition, with Sweden's government falling after no confidence vote, I'll be discussing the path forward there. In the future, I will also be covering the latest on the coronavirus pandemic, including the entry of the new Novavax vaccine to the mix and the threats posed by the Delta variant. For now, all I can say on that subject is get vaccinated. For more information about these and other stories, read my weekly political intelligence briefing and my coronavirus report, both of which are accessible from the front page of the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. And remember that we live in an interconnected world.